All right, I want to say good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to our work session, Wake County Board of Education. December 1st, we are a little shortly after 3 as we get started. We've got several items on our agenda this afternoon for work session, so we've got a pretty full one. We are joined here in the boardroom by everyone is present. Mrs. Cash should be here shortly. She's running a little bit late, but other than that, we have all board members here. Want to welcome with us for her first meeting, Mrs. Karen Carter, representing District 9, newly elected. Will be sworn in later today, but welcome to our work session. Glad you are here. Good afternoon to all other board members. Good to see you all as well. I hope that everyone had a safe and somewhat distant Thanksgiving holiday, but that you still got your field and everyone had some connection with family in some way. So with that, we'll get started. And the first item is the 2020-2021 instructional calendars, looking at single track for the year-round calendar specifically. And so before we do, Superintendent Moore, any comments? Or you driving, or we're going straight to Wade?
Well, just a couple of quick things. So we are bringing back an adjustment to the 21-22 calendars for multi-track year-round and modified for next year's, so that, because board members, I think someone had expressed an interest in seeing what it would take in terms of a change in the calendar to have a 2-week winter break. So we're going to look at that. That one is up for action this evening. So whatever the board determines this afternoon will be on the action agenda in terms of which one we bring forward. And then the other 2 items are things that have been brought up in the interim that are some needs that need to be addressed with this year's calendar with a couple of our early colleges, and then a option to look at for our current multi-track year-round schools that are operating on a single track year-round calendar and track 1, and the issues that were brought up at the last meeting about that. The early colleges, Vernon Malone and North Wake College and Career, are on action this evening. The single track year-round is next board meeting, December 15th, to have an opportunity for the large number of families we have in the district to weigh in. So those are the 3 calendar items that you have on your agenda. And then, of course, we have our return to instruction, in-person instruction update. And Dr. Benjamin will be joining us for the first part of that later on in the meeting. I'll turn it over to Wade.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Board Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and board members. It is a pleasure to be back with you today to review a number of items that Superintendent Moore outlined related to our current year calendar as well as our 21-22 calendar. I would like to begin by just sharing with everyone that we as a district have continued to focus on ways to support high-quality instructional programs across all of our calendars this current year, while staying keenly aware and responsive to the safety concerns of our families, students, and staff. These focus areas have really driven the need for us to be nimble and flexible as our calendar committee has continued to work with our multi-tiered instructional team and other stakeholders to respond to the evolving impacts of COVID. I just want to really restate that we recognize that changes to our current year calendars are difficult for our families, and it continues to be our goal to be responsive to providing the most optimal instructional calendar really to support the educational needs of our schools, of our families and staff, while at the entire time keeping in mind the evolving safety concerns that we've continued to address. So with me this afternoon is Tamani Anderson-Powell, the director of our Magnet and Curriculum Enhancement Office, who serves as our calendar committee chair. And for our second presentation, with me will be Paul Domenico, also in our Magnet office as our Director of Curriculum Enhancement. So the first item that we will talk about really came out of the conversation during the November 17th work session. Staff shared with the board and the public the proposed 21-22 calendars. Those calendars, as Superintendent Moore mentioned, are being brought this evening for your approval as an action item. During the work session discussion, staff was tasked to see if there was a possible solution to the problem for our Track 1 students and families having only a very, very short, just about a week, summer break in the transition from this current school year to our next. So as you know, our multi-track schools are currently all following the single-track calendar, which ends on June 29th. And for our Track 1 families, they were scheduled to start the school year on July 8th. So today, as an information item, staff will share with you a proposed update to our second semester single track 4 calendar that could offer a solution to this track 1 issue for our families. Staff will bring this item back to the board at our next meeting on December 15th for action. The board and the public can see the 3 calendars that have been posted in Assembly. I will be speaking today specifically to the reference calendar noted as revised. After a deep discussion and review with our attorneys of the calendar committee's original proposal, we found that the original proposal that was shared did not meet the updated year-round definition that currently applies to our single-track calendar for this year. Just to remind the public, the new year-round definition for 21-22 that impacts all of our single-track and multi-track schools requires students to attend an average of between 44 and 46 instructional days, followed by an average of 15 to 20 days of vacation repeated throughout the year. So to ensure that this proposed revision that would allow for the summer vacation complied with this updated definition, we brought back that revised proposal. So that proposal does, however, I want to highlight one assumption that I think is important for the board and for the public to be aware of. And this assumption is that our multi-track calendar schools will begin the 2021-22 school year back under normal operating structures of a multi-track. Today's proposal makes this assumption and strives to ensure that our Track 1 families and staff will get some summer break while fully recognizing that there are still many questions about what the opening of 2021-22 will look like. Allow me to take just a moment to outline the details of the changes. So the revised proposal decreases the last spring break track out, which is in the spring, to be from March 31st to April 6th. So essentially, we have reduced the final track out by 6 days, and this still does allow a 2-week track out for everyone at school. By shortening this last track out period, this would allow us to move the last day of the school year from June 29th to June 21st. So essentially, taking those 6 days and backing that up. The result of this proposed change provides Track 1 families a summer break from June 22nd to July 7th, essentially a 2-week summer vacation. This proposal was developed by the school administrators on our calendar committee and then was shared with all of our year-round principals for input and feedback. The feedback that we received from our school principals supported this proposal. One important point that I would like to share that came directly from our principals goes back to the assumption that I shared earlier. If, due to changing factors, our multi-track calendar schools open the 21-22 year on a single-track calendar again due to unforeseen challenges at the time, we would be making an unnecessary change to our current second semester calendar. So it's worth noting. So again, it goes back to that assumption that our 21-22 calendar, that we will open as a multi-track structure. Lastly, I share with you that the revised calendar does meet all of the legal requirements of the current calendar law. And again, we will not be asking for any action today on this proposal, but we'll bring it back to you for the next scheduled meeting on December 15th. At this time, Ms. Anderson, Powell, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have regarding this revised change to our second semester single track 4 calendar.
All right, questions. Dr. Martin.
Yeah, I guess I have one logistical question. I don't quite understand why, and I see you've given kind of 2 calendars with different options, why we would end on a Monday. To have the last day of school being a Monday doesn't make a lot of logistical sense, and it almost, I don't know all the ins and outs of the rest of the calendar, but it almost would make sense if we instead had school on the 13th of April, because a long weekend, having a Monday instead of a Monday and a Tuesday would seem to make more sense than to have the last day of school be a Monday. But there may be some logic that I don't understand.
Mr. Martin, Dr. Martin, that's a great question. And what I would share with you is that ideally, the original calendar closed for the school year on a Tuesday, the 29th. The most that we were able to back up that last track out was to the 13th. If that track out did not maintain at least those 10 days, then we would not be able to comply with the current updated calendar law that applies to our year-round schools. So we cut as many days out of that last track out as we could to comply with the law, and then we moved back the last day of school the most number of days that we could to also ensure that we met our instructional hours minimum of the number of days that we had built into the calendar. If we moved either of those any further back, we would not be, unfortunately, in compliance with the current calendar law.
Okay, I understand that, and the calendar law is problematic. Would perchance, and I'm not saying it would be any better, if we shifted one of the work days, for example, potentially, well, I guess those are remote learning days.
Yes, the days that are in, again, we looked at that. Those identified days in March that are on the 29th and 30th are, as you recall, two of the original session law remote learning days that we were required to build into the calendar.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll listen for feedback from the community.
Agreed.
Mrs. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. And Mr. Martin, and as you noted, this is assuming that that 21-22 calendar, that the 4-track and the single-track for schools will begin as we normally do. The multi-track schools will start in July sometime. So is that what you're trying to underscore as far as that we are in some ways taking a risk that we're assuming that we're going to start our year-round schools as we traditionally have in the past, and that COVID and the pandemic will be past us and we won't miss July again? Is that what you were trying to underscore as a risk?
Yes, ma'am. Ultimately, the proposed 21-22 calendar for our multi-track schools has all tracks other than track 4 beginning on July 8th.
Right.
The unknown as we proceed to move forward, and we'll obviously have further discussion, is the impact of what will virtual academy options look like as we transition into the next school year, and will our multi-track schools therefore have the ability to remain on a single track calendar because they wouldn't have the capacity to operate under a the multi-track, or we're going to make the assumption that we will begin as normal as possible, with the understanding that we will have that baseline then of that calendar to begin with, like we did this year, to then make the needed adjustments that we would have.
I mean, that's what I'm struggling with, to be honest, because we've been, the pandemic has made us shift so many times on our calendars that I think that has created some confusion. So as crisply as we can communicate all of this is going to be critically important, because we have been doing a lot of shifting for thoughtful and real health and safety reasons, but that's why I'm struggling to keep up a little bit with all the changes we're making with calendars. So thank you.
Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. Mr. Martin and Ms. Anderson-Powell, thank you for bringing this into consideration and making sure that our Track 1 families, if we're able to have that time next year, get that break between, and not just for our families, but for our teachers, so they have that time to reset between academic years. and we don't know what 2021, 22 is going to bring. We certainly hope for the best, but if anything, this year has taught us that we're not sure what that's going to look like. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And just one of the things that I think it's worth pointing out, without this adjustment to our current year second semester calendar, potentially our Track 1 students and staff would be in school for 19 straight weeks with only that short 4 to 5 day break as we transition from the July rollover. So that would be a really lengthy stretch of instructional time and for all of our Track 1 families, as well as Ms. Mahaffey pointed out, for our teachers that are on that Track 1 and would be transitioning to that. So just that's to give you a little additional context in terms of what that could look like for our Track 1 families.
Mr. Hagerty.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, I just wanted to follow up about the timeline that we're on, too. I know that there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know what's going to go on in the community with the virus at this point. We also don't know what the legislature might do in terms of any new statutory requirement on the calendar, and they will be back in session coming in January and addressing this. And I don't anticipate any change of leadership. So, looking at what they did this past year, we can only guess what they might do this coming year. So, though we have all these unknowns and variables, I know you and your team need so much time in advance to plan for the changes, and that the sooner we plan a change, the more options we have. So do you think this is the optimum time to consider any changes if we're going to make a change? Do you think it could be revisited later, or do you think if we tried to look at it later, we wouldn't have enough time to make a change?
So Wade, let me just take that. So part of what we were looking at was what notice can we provide our families now? And how do we increase the amount of time that Track 1 families would have now in this semester? Because we're planning for a regular school year next year in terms of the calendar. If that changes and we would have to make a shift, it would probably be for the next school year's calendar, not anymore for this school year's calendar. So it's just about the amount of time that we provide in notice for doing that. We could wait longer to do this, but at the break in the semester seems like a good time so that families can plan if they want to do something during that time. Rather than waiting. So it's really just about as much advance notice, knowing that this is sort of a natural break anyway, and not knowing what's going to happen next year. If something were to happen next year, what would happen would be that we'd have to start later, which would then mean their break would be longer, which would not be a terrible thing. So those are kind of the thoughts that were rolling around our heads.
Great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Ms. Cash.
First of all, I want to thank Mr. Martin for talking with me through this the other day. I appreciate that. And I was able to reach out to some of the teachers that had contacted me and some of the parents in North Raleigh. I think they are very happy with what we've come up with, and I appreciate the fact that you shared with me this. And I do know that we're going to actually face some changes possibly in the future, but thank you for the work on this, Mr. Martin. I wanted to let you know that.
Thank you, Ms. Cash.
All right, seeing no further questions from the board, is there anything else on this topic? Mr. Martin?
No, sir.
Okay, this is for information, and I think board approval, again, is being requested at our meeting at 5:30. No.
This one is for December 15th. We've got a little time on this one.
Okay.
The next two are for the board meeting later on.
I thought that's what you said, but it's here in assembly. It says December 1st. All right, next topic, cohort rotations for North Wake and the Vernon Malone Career and College Academies. That's also, I think, you, Mr. Martin?
It is.
Okay.
Thank you again. So with me today is Paul Domenico, the Director of Curriculum Enhancement with our Magnet office. Paul and the Magnet office staff have worked closely with two of our early colleges, North Wake College and Career Academy, as well as Vernon Malone College and Career Academy, to develop a second semester plan that supports the unique needs of the students and staff that work in partnership with our college partner, Wake Tech Community College. Paul will share the details of this proposal with you, and at the conclusion of this presentation, we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Domenico.
Thank you, Mr. Martin, and good afternoon. Superintendent Moore, Board Chair Sutton, and board members, we appreciate your time this afternoon. I hope you're doing well. As Mr. Martin noted, we're going to talk about the uniqueness that exists at the two college and career academies as they are planning for in-person instruction to start the second semester. And some of this came up as we started looking at what their needs were compared to other high schools and early colleges in our district. So just to go a little bit into that, both North Wake and Vernon Malone College and Career Academy partner with Wake Tech Community College. And what's really unique about these two schools is that the Wake Tech programs and courses are taught directly on those two schools' campuses. They have the classroom accommodations to meet all these needs and also to meet the lab requirements that exist for the two college and career academies. And as noted, so some of these programs that are taught at both North Wake and Vernon Malone require more hands-on lab time for students to meet the course and certification requirements that exist. Think, if you would, of, say, like at North Wake, the culinary arts program or their EMT courses they take, or at Vernon Malone, the cosmetology program or the welding program. You can imagine that, it definitely requires students to be in person for hands-on learning. So with that in mind, during the course of the first semester, in order to meet these requirements for the lab courses, Wake Tech determined that they could do so if students could meet in person every other week. And that way students could have the appropriate amount of in-person lab time to meet what was required by the course. And also by splitting the courses into two cohorts, it would allow students and staff at Wake Tech to meet any social distancing guidelines due to COVID-19. The weeks that students were not in person with their lab course through Wake Tech, they attended their courses virtually. During first semester, transportation also worked with the two schools to accommodate students who needed yellow bus transportation to either Vernon Malone or North Wake. So they were very helpful in making this happen too. The students who, both North Wake and Vernon Malone, who were not enrolled in these lab courses that was aligned with the Wake Tech program, they were able to take their college courses virtually throughout the first semester. So now as we're starting to jump into the second semester in planning, definitely there's some needs that have arisen. And of course, for our district, Wake County, we're planning for high school students to return in Plan B, where they'll be on a 3-week rotation. But at these two schools, the Wake Tech program courses will still be operating on this 2-week rotation for the students in these lab courses. Wake Tech is knowing that what we're trying to make happen for our students at these two schools, they've been agreeable to also have their non-lab courses work on a 2-week rotational basis for the two schools. So what we would like to propose and bring to the board is this proposal, and to have you approve and formalize the 2-week rotation schedule that courses have already been doing throughout the first semester. So the proposal is to align students' schedule to the 2-week rotation, where one rotation schedule is more manageable for the students and for the school. It ensures the students will also be in class for learning each week there on campus. So in other words, we didn't want students specifically in 11th and 12th grade who are taking these lab courses to be trying to manage both a 2-week rotational schedule and a 3-week rotational schedule all at once. Additionally, if we had students who were on 2 different rotational schedules, if they had transportational needs during the day, they would, say, be taking their college courses during the day at one of the 2 academies, and then they would be on campus and not have their Wake County courses because that wasn't their week rotation to be in person, and we would need to have a space for them to go. So this allows for everything to align and to meet the needs for the students at both schools. Now, in further planning with the 2 principals at both North Wake and at Vernon Malone, there are factors that led us to note that we had to differentiate further for the needs of the 2 different schools. So at North Wake specifically, students in 11th and 12th grade would be attending on a 2-week rotating schedule in this proposal, so they can maintain COVID safety protocols for both their Wake County and their Wake Tech courses. Now, with the number of staff that will be on campus in the second semester, class sizes would be over capacity when trying to meet the 6 feet social distancing guidelines for the 9th and 10th grade courses in this 2-week rotation. So in that model, we would have some classes that would have too many students and we wouldn't be able to meet the 6 feet social distancing guidelines. Therefore, we are proposing that students in 9th and 10th grade would attend on the district's Plan B 3-week rotating schedule. It's also important to note that 9th and 10th graders are not impacted by the Wake Tech courses or the lab courses that I described earlier. So again, at North Wake, the proposal is to have 11th and 12th graders attending on a 2-week rotational schedule, and for the 9th and 10th graders to attend on their 3-week rotational schedule as outlined by the district. At Vernon Malone, they did not have some of the safety precautions that are put into place, right? They had the safety precautions, but they didn't have the student numbers there that would impact them the way that it did at North Wake due to the number of students in Virtual Academy. And when we looked at their schedule and accounting for the students signed into Virtual Academy, all students in 9 through 12 can attend a 2-week rotating schedule while maintaining safety protocols for COVID-19 for the Wake County and their Wake Tech courses. So we're proposing for Vernon Malone for all students 9 through 12 to go on this 2-week rotating schedule. Also, just wanted to note that this wasn't planning and decisions that were made in isolation. We did communicate with and plan with Wake Tech Community College. My point contact there, Terry Allen, worked with both department heads and provost there to ensure that everything was agreeable from what we were trying to propose. We also worked with school administration, Dr. Battle and Ms. Stotzenberg at both their schools, put a lot of time and consideration into what this proposal is. We worked with their area superintendents, and we also have been communicating with the transportation department, as they have also noted that they can make this schedule and this proposal happen in the second semester. Also, and just wanted to reinforce and note that the enrollment numbers at both schools and with this proposal will allow for the continued adherence to all of our COVID guidelines that we have from a state and district under the second semester for this proposal. So having said that, now I'm going to turn it over to see if there's any questions that we can answer for you.
Mrs. Scott.
Thank you. I was curious about the numbers at North Wake College and Career Academy with doing the two different schedules at the school. We haven't received an updated, but we did receive a document that had some of the numbers for the number of students enrolled in Virtual Academy for first and second semester. And again, that document was sent back in October, I think. And the numbers didn't seem to be that different between the two schools. I acknowledge the buildings are different. I just worry about trying to have students on different subjects. I know that only impacts electives, but I'm just curious how much of an impact that's going to have on the teachers at the school. In other words, how many, I was just surprised to see that the number of students didn't seem to be that different between Virtual Academy, between the two different school sites. So I was surprised to see that two different schedules would be proposed.
I think what Mr. Domenico had explained was that the principals, in reviewing their enrollments for second semester, determined at Vernon Malone that they could put the entire 9-12 on a 2-week rotation and maintain the required 6 foot of distancing in all of their classrooms in 2 weeks. And that facilitates the 11th and 12th graders who need to take the Wake Tech courses in that same rotation. At North Wake College and Career, what the principal determined looking at the number of students for next semester is that they would not be able to maintain the 6 foot social distancing in grades 9 and 10 on a 2-week rotation, and therefore recommended, well, we have to stay on a 3-week rotation if you can't do the social distancing. But 11 and 12, those classes do tend to be a little smaller, and because they're split up amongst Wake Tech classes as well, they're divided a little bit differently and could accomplish it with 11th and 12th graders and meet Wake Tech's requirement for their lab courses. It's not ideal. It remains consistent for the students, so the students aren't managing two schedules, but the teachers are depending on if you have teachers who teach 10th graders and 11th graders, you may have teachers that have a group that's coming in every 3 weeks and a group that's coming in every 2 weeks. That is correct.
But this was a principal-driven decision?
Yes.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Dr. Martin?
Thank you. I share that concern. I had asked by email a little earlier in the week and got the response about the numbers, and I hear that. I guess my question is, in most of our high schools, we do have 9th and 10th graders taking 11th and 12th grade courses, so there often is some kind of a blending across the grades in high school. it's rarely grade specific, as it tends to be in elementary school and maybe more so in middle school. So the question really is, at Northern Wake, are the students really grade specific, or are there classes that normally have enrollment across the, I would guess probably most likely the 10th and 11th, but possibly more so?
I'm sure that they have some courses that are mixed grade levels.
And so I guess the corollary question to that is, so how will that be addressed?
Right.
I mean, I hear the number issue, but
Right.
there's multiple issues that need to be addressed.
Paul, do you recall in the conversation with the principals about any conversation about mixed grade level classes?
Superintendent Moore.
There you go. Go
Hi
ahead.
there. In my conversation at confirmation with Dr. Battle, they do not have any 11th and 12th graders core classes that share 9th and 10th graders. Only electives are in that, elective courses are in that situation. So that is not the case at her school. And as for, I think it's also important to note that even with those numbers, Dr. Battle sent us class sizes or grade level sizes of approximately 100, 101. And though they have the number of staff, we have 5 of our teachers on HR accommodations. And so this is only doable as on a 2-week rotation, as we would be able to get staff off of HR accommodations based on obviously the current situation. And so I just wanted to point out both of those situations is, yes, the numbers are very similar in those schools, but we have a different number of staff who are on HR accommodations that will not allow us to be able to distribute those students in the way that we could manage the 2-week rotation. And then secondly, just going back to the point of the courses, it was confirmed at the school level by the principal, and as well as the school staff there sent me the matrix today, that they do not have core courses that they share with their 9th and 10th grade students.
And again, I appreciate that with the core courses. Electives are real and important courses as well. So are the elective courses now going to become grade specific, or is there going to be a strategy to deal with splitting across calendars?
There is a strategy, and they're doing it at the school level because it is unique. But even in my confirmation at the school level, there are a few that they have combined for those electives, but they are working that out on their end, and they have even gone as far as to reach out, look at their sibling situation to ensure that we don't even have a sibling issue when we come to the 3-week and a 2-week rotation for those families. And the one specific case that we did, that was already discussed with that family, and that is resolved. So just want you to know that a lot of due diligence has been done to ensure that we are doing what's best for both students as well as the staff, because the principal has worked with her staff on this as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any additional questions from board members? All right, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Domenico. Mr. Mark?
Thank you.
And this one is on action this evening.
Actually, I did think of is there not a need to adjust the health sciences early college?
I believe they reviewed that one as well, and they did not need to do it.
Okay.
I asked the same question.
All right, thank you.
That is correct.
All right. Thank you all for that. And again, Superintendent Moore said that will be on the action agenda for this evening's meeting.
Thank you.
Now moving to the 2021-22 instructional calendars for traditional and modified and multi-track year-round. So, Mr. Martin, we'll kick it back to you.
Thank you, sir. And again, with me is Ms. Anderson Powell. During the November 17th work session, the second item that the calendar committee was tasked with following up on was really specific to the proposed 21-22 traditional calendar. Staff has shared in Assembly the original proposed 21-22 traditional calendar and a revised calendar that does incorporate a 2-week winter break. Allow me to outline just a few of the changes between these calendars. There's not many. In order for us to move 2 teacher workdays to allow for that 2-week winter break, the calendar committee proposed moving the start of the school year from Tuesday, August 24th to Monday, August 23rd. And this did, however, reduce the opening teacher workday from 5 days to 4 days. Also, the workday that was previously on April 18th, which is the Monday following spring break, that full week of spring break, this change did remove the only teacher workday that was in April, which does not align with our original goal of having 1 teacher workday per month. However, the committee felt like the month of April did have, in the middle of that month, that 1 week off for spring break, so that moving that 1 day wouldn't have a huge negative impact. Staff was able to get some very valuable input from STAC, the Superintendent Teachers Advisory Council. In collaboration with Ms. Hodge, we were able to send them the proposal and seek some feedback from them. 97% of those that replied to our response last week agreed with this proposed change. We did allow for some specific input, and I would like to highlight 2 of the main ideas that emerged. One was that the teachers felt like having this additional 2 days of work days really would be beneficial to begin planning for second semester for those that need it. They recognized that those are kind of a crazy couple of days just before the holiday. However, it really can be beneficial around having some time together to begin planning for second semester, because as soon as they return from that holiday break, as you know, at least at the high school level, many of those teachers are almost immediately jumping into exams. The second is that the days leading up to the winter break, and I think this feedback really came more so from our elementary folks, was that the break really provided more meaningful and rigorous instruction. As when we have those the 2-day short week, there's times when many students whose families start their break early and miss those last 2 days of instruction. And with this proposed revision, this would not be the case, as they would close that with a full work week of Monday through Friday leading up to the break. I do want to note that while there was overwhelming support from staff for this proposed change, one note of consistent concern, even for those that said they fully agreed with this proposal, was just the concern and noting that losing that workday at the opening of the school year was difficult. They felt like it was worth the extra time and beneficial to have that longer full 2-week winter break, but that was certainly a concern that was noted enough times that I felt like it was worth sharing with you all. So again, just to recap, what we have proposed is simply moving the start of the school year back by 1 day, capturing 1 teacher workday there, and moving the previously scheduled workday from April 18th to make those 2 days prior to the break. At this time, Ms. Anderson, Powell, and I are happy to answer any questions. And as Superintendent Moore highlighted, we will need to kind of have an idea from the board which of these 2 proposals you would like us to move forward, as we'll be taking the 3 calendars, this traditional calendar, as well as the modified and multi-track calendars for actions.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. Martin. Any questions from board members? Mr. Hagerty.
Thank you. I want to thank staff for taking this proposal, developing it, and also taking it to STAC. I know that several of us had heard from individuals that had been pushing this, but without knowing a broader reaction, you don't want to make a decision with only a limited amount of input. So I really appreciate all the effort that went into that, and it sounds like it's a very good proposal. I'm obligated to bring this up. I know that we had considered this calendar earlier, and today we're considering the change for it. But between our last meeting and this meeting, I was contacted by the members of the Wake County Board of Elections who had questions about the teacher workdays that were scheduled, pointing out that we had a teacher workday scheduled Tuesday, November the 2nd, which is an election day, but only for some municipalities in Raleigh. But we did not have a teacher workday for October of that year, October 5th, which is local government election days for the city of Raleigh and the city of Cary. On the 5th, we had 40 schools that will be used as polling places, whereas in the November date, we would have only 27 schools. I directed it to Mr. Martin and staff, and they produced answers for me, explaining that there were other considerations other than the election, but because I know some other people might have some questions, if staff could explain some of the differences in that decision just for the public, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly, Mr. Haggerty, and I'll start by allowing Ms. Anderson-Powell to address that. I know that over the course of the last few years, she's been serving as our committee chair, and that continues to be a question every year in terms of how do we decide on, with that very tight handful of workday options, how those decisions are made. So I'll let her first speak to that. And again, recognize that we did include the one, but in the month of October, I would just share with the board and the public that we actually did add an additional teacher workday into that month as recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day, which was on October 11th. And that was some work that occurred from the 2019 calendar committee's work, and then bringing that back this year as we revised and looked at what some of the decisions that were reached back in 2019. So with there just being a very finite number of optional teacher workdays in terms of where to place them, that really took priority for the committee, given the importance of that recognition that the board made this year for Indigenous Peoples Day, and it was something that the committee felt very strongly about. So we were not able to accommodate that October date. And again, we were able to accommodate the November date. And what was really unique about the November date was that also, while it was election day, a really second driver was that was one of the few days in November that worked across all calendars for us to do district-wide professional development. The work that Emily Mountford and her team has started this year in developing that comprehensive professional development plan for staff throughout the year, that was really an important day that we didn't want to miss, given that it worked as a teacher workday across all of our calendars, traditional, modified, as well as our year-round calendar. So anything additional, I'll certainly allow Ms. Anderson-Powell to add some additional context if possible.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. So I did want to mention that each year for the past few years, the committee has considered at the election day in November for a teacher workday. We do look to see if that election is a national election or maybe the level of the election. But in the past, we have not always gotten ahead of time from the Board of Election other election dates or other dates to consider. So we certainly are happy to have those dates ahead of time as we continue to look at the 22-23 calendar, but we felt that looking at it right now for the 21-22 calendar, noting that we already have 2 workdays in October would maybe further stress October with an undue amount of workdays, and concurring with the workday in November really does work as a district-wide teacher workday. However, the other dates that the board sent, we certainly can consider those as we look at the 22-23 calendars, because when we look at the election days, we try to see if we can make that day work for all of our instructional calendars, and that would mean also considering those dates for the year-round, the modified, as well as the early college calendars.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to explain all of that, and I think the point particularly about finding one day that spans all calendars for professional development is very compelling. If the County Board of Elections or others do want to have input into the calendaring process, I know it's in the spring, when would they need to make comments to staff and to the committee?
So typically, I do the calendars, I do them. I'm the liaison for the committees, and it usually is about a year and a half out. So in an ordinary year, like I did this year, I would, in October and November, host those committee meetings to create drafts. And then we present them to the board in January, February, March for approval in that springtime so that they're approved about a year in advance. So it helps us to get those dates as early as possible. But typically we meet in October to present to you in February for a March approval.
Great. I appreciate the explanation. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Mr. Hagerty, any other questions from board members?
We do need some consensus on which calendar to bring forward in the action item this evening.
Dr. Martin.
Well, I'm glad to say I appreciate the work, and I would support the 2-week winter break that seems to have the support of staff. Thank you for making that revision.
If that's a motion, I'd second it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe a thumbs up.
Yeah. Someone looking for a thumbs up. Thoughts?
Okay.
Okay. All right. We'll accept that recommendation from staff for the changes, and we'll look for that proposal to be on the action agenda this evening. Thank you again,
so
Mr.
much
Martin.
for your time and consideration.
Yes, sir. Thank you, and thank you also, Ms. Anderson-Powell. All right, that brings us to our return to in-person instruction. So this is our typical update. And so, Superintendent Moore, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. Board members, so we are providing, as we normally do, an update on our return to in-person instruction. And as soon as we get the presentation up, we'll move to slide 2, I think. Go ahead. Okay. So in previous meetings, we have explained to the board that as we move forward and are reviewing where we are with our current implementation of in-person instruction, there are 3 things that we will consider regularly to see if we need to pivot, make any changes, come back, et cetera, as we look at our plans for second semester. Obviously, one of those areas is any new or additional information that comes, or executive orders that come out of the governor's office or DHHS. We'll actually talk a little bit about that in a minute. Another one is the collaboration that we continue to have and the learnings that happen with state and local health officials and the ABC Science Collaborative. And as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Benjamin will be on shortly to share some of his work. And then monitoring the implementation of our district's current plan and programming. What is the feedback that we're getting? How are we adjusting? Do we continue to have ample supply of PPE and cleaning supplies? Staffing in schools? There's a number of different things that we continue to look at to make sure that things are going well. And so in the spirit of reminding us of these 3, we were going to try to sort of bucket our follow-up in each of these 3 as well. And so we're going to be talking, in some cases, every single part of our presentation today hits on one of these 3. Okay. So the first one was any updates coming from the governor. So, a week or so ago, he did change his guidance that went into effect just around Thanksgiving, I think it was. And one of the first changes that he made that we're sitting here exhibiting right now is the number that can congregate inside. And that limit became 10. So we've scaled back our meetings again in order to comply with that order. And then the second one had to do with face coverings that were now required and mostly the changes were to private schools that were not necessarily under the same guidance or called out explicitly to follow the same guidance that now must follow that guidance. And then some changes around youth athletics and sports where you've seen some guidance that came out from NCHSAA that now all indoor sports, when they are practicing and any that are currently competing must be masked as well. The only ones that are currently competing are volleyball and cross country. And for cross country, they are required to be masked until they get to the start line. and then they can actually compete without their mask on and have to put it back on when they're done, because there is a greater ability to social distance in cross country, although I'm not going to say it's perfect if you've ever watched a meet. But those were updates that came from the governor that have impacted to some extent what we're doing ourselves within the school system. We will continue to monitor those changes, obviously, and be responsive to them. So the next piece of information, I'm just going to briefly introduce this and let Dr. Benjamin sort of take it over. But two of the things that he will be touching base on all of us today is in their work, they have established 12 principles that seem to consistently apply in how to safely reopen schools. And so he's going to talk a little bit about those, give some of the context that's happening statewide around the research, and also some of that context in terms of how we're doing here in Wake County. So there may be some little bit of Q&A and discussion around this area as we go through it. And then the second item that he will go over is a discussion that we've had a couple of times around how is the district going to make decisions or investigate or contemplate the need to potentially close a classroom or close a school or look at something at the district level, and what would trigger that, who would be involved, and what would that timeline and space look like. So they have come up with some language and recommendations to support how districts do that as well. So I will now turn it over to Dr. Benjamin.
Great, thank you. And are you all able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Easily? Great, thank you. So next slide, please. Thanks again to you all for having me and for having the ABCs. Just as a reminder to folks who are listening to this public meeting, the ABCs don't give detailed advice. Rather, it's a collaboration between stakeholders, and to remind folks to that all decisions ultimately remain with the local school districts, and to keep an eye on the NC-DHHS toolkit, which is a resource I know that Wake has been using. Go ahead, next slide, please. So the 12 principles. So really, first and foremost, start with the 3 W's, right? And then these follow. So once you put in your, once you ensure masking, once you ensure distancing, and once you ensure hand hygiene. And the first of these are to be transparent in reporting of infections. And I'll go over these more slowly and in more detail in a little bit. And they go through the 12 that you see there. I'm not going to read these out loud. What I'm going to give you as you take a look at them is the context that these are in place based on an iterative process that went over the last, now it's almost 16 weeks total, between school districts that are in the collaborative, that have been in face-to-face instruction, the faculty, and other stakeholders, where whenever there was challenges related to any particular policy or any particular plan or infections or secondary infections or clusters, the collaborative folks within the collaborative worked back and forth to hone down to these 12 principles. So they're strictly based on experience and on supported, as I think you'll see here in a moment, by some fairly compelling data that is, I can only characterize as very, very successful. Go ahead, next slide, please. This is an abstract, and an abstract is a formal write-up at the beginning of an article in peer review. We have submitted the abstract and the data to the National Institute of Health, and have sent it to some representatives from the CDC. What you're seeing here today is an abstract that we have sent to a medical journal, and the data and the full article will be undergoing peer review here in the month of December. You can see the background. Essentially, the frequency of within-school transmission is initially was thought that it was going to be very high. It's now considerable speculation that it's much lower than we originally anticipated. As everyone here knows, North Carolina closed to in-person instruction, and some schools came back for in-person instruction during the full 9 weeks. Now, of the 50 some odd school districts in North Carolina in the collaborative, a group of them, 11 of them, were in person for all 9 weeks. They were all agreed to share data on both primary infections and within school transmission of infection. And go ahead, next slide, please. And so they also agreed to have local health department staff adjudicate primary versus secondary transmission. Now, secondary transmission, remember, that's within school transmission. So primary transmission or community transmission, we know that when we have several hundred cases per 100,000 population, excuse me, one second, I've got some at-home school learning going on. Sorry about that. We're all remote learning here in Chapel Hill. So let's see. This group agreed to track both primary and secondary infections. Primary infections, we know that when there are several hundred infections per 100,000 population, as is the case right now in the Triangle, up to 900 per 100,000 in some counties in North Carolina, there's going to be people who come to school with infections. And that's going to happen whether or not schools are open or schools are closed. People are going to get infected with COVID at that amount of community transmission. So primary infections just mean I've come to school, I've gotten COVID in my at home or doing something else in my community. What we want to avoid as a school district is secondary transmission or within school transmission. That is, I get my classmates or my teacher sick. Go ahead, next slide, please. Or if I'm a teacher, I want to avoid getting my students or other adults sick. So there were, in these 11 school districts, over the 9 weeks of instruction combined, that represents a population of about 100,000 people, students who came to school face-to-face, plus the adults that were in those schools. There were 775 community-acquired infections documented by molecular testing. Now, the amount of, remember that most of the time in North Carolina, if you have an infection, you're going to infect somewhere between 1 and 2 other people. That's why we keep getting higher and higher numbers in North Carolina. So we would expect if schools were similar to the rest of the community, we would expect somewhere around 900 or 1,000 additional secondary infections. However, through contact tracing, the health departments in these districts adjudicated there to be only 32 secondary infections acquired within school. This is an astoundingly low number. Of note, there were no instances of child to adult transmission. So in the first 9 weeks of instruction in these 11 school districts in North Carolina, there's extremely limited within school transmission. What is it that these school districts did? They are reflected in the 9 principles. Let's just take a couple of highlights. Of note, as has been stated before in this meeting, these were in hybrid instruction for the 9 weeks. They were somewhere between 95 and 100,000 children and staff coming to schools. We've confirmed those numbers.
Go ahead and move to the next slide, Beth.
With those superintendents. And there were a few cases where we actually saw most of the secondary transmissions. So when did that happen? Well, those happened when there were masks off. So there was a number of secondary transmissions in the adapted curriculum environment. Again, this works out to approximately 1 or 2 cases per school district per 9 weeks of COVID. This is not reflect death or hospitalization or even symptomatic infection. This is just test positive secondary infections. But a group of them happened in the adapted curriculum environment, or what in Wake County, I think you all refer to as the regional curriculum. There was a school district where in August, the NCDHHS did not require masking in pre-K. One of the school districts did not require masking in the pre-K environment, and they had a group of pre-K children develop COVID from secondary infections. That policy has since changed. That's one of the reasons why the ABCs have been recommending masking across all ages, and not to have mask breaks. The not to have mask breaks is further exemplified in the third bullet point. There was a larger group of children who were not who were mainstreamed, but were special needs students, where they had an extended lunchtimes together, less than 6 feet apart with mask off. It looks like, and that policy for that group has since been changed in those districts, and it's one of the reasons why we put such a detailed plan together as it relates to lunchtime. So these cases would come up. The superintendents would be on a phone call, kind of moderated by the ABC faculty, and we went through an iterative process over lessons learned to get to the 12 principles that you're going to see here. Go ahead, next slide, please. I will note that these 11 school districts are much like, I would categorize them, most of these districts are how I would categorize Wake. That is, they are what I would call all-in school districts. As it relates to the ABCs, they're very invested in putting together policy and executing on that policy. Excuse me one sec. Sorry about that. Let's see. So again, if we assume that we know that in North Carolina, each person infects just over one other person on average. We expected 900 plus secondary infections. We observed 32. And just something to think about. I know some folks are asking, gosh, what do we do about schools? I just want you to think about, look, how do we spend our time, right? And there's 168 hours in a week. If we limit our consideration to 5 days during the week, and we assume that there's 8 hours of sleep per day, that leaves us with 80-hour week to do other activities. So we can either spend those 80 hours, all 80 hours, in what right now is a moderate risk environment for COVID. That is the state of North Carolina in the community, where one person on average infects 1.2 others, as evidenced by the increasing community cases. Or we can spend 40 hours in that moderate risk environment outside of school and 40 hours at low risk in school. So even if there is no value to in-person instruction, and the only function of a school is to protect children and staff from COVID, then children and staff are safer in schools, provided that, and I just need to emphasize this because I know that in some districts, this really does need to be emphasized, provided that the 12 principles are strictly enforced. These data really only relate to the hybrid model instruction. We just don't know yet about Plan A. And it's really taking the toolkit, reinforcing some of those lessons learned, which we'll get into in a minute, and to see how Wake County is doing specifically as it relates to those 12 principles. I've taken a look at what you all have done. I'll comment on that in a minute. And fundamentally, you have before you really a public health decision. At the individual level, that's a very different question. How should I, as an individual person or as an individual parent, spend my time? But as a public health decision, you now have some data upon which to make a public health decision. You have 1,000 other things to consider about whether or not you should keep schools open or you should open up schools. I have no opinion on that. I only have the medical COVID-19 risk perspective based on data from the hybrid environment. Go ahead, next slide, please. So here are some limitations. So contact tracing is imperfect, certainly in the school, but it's also imperfect in the community. And quite frankly, I don't know that this is the case in Wake County, but I can tell you from personal experience, it's very, very, very imperfect in the community. And so I think in that sense, we are likely comparing apples to apples. In fact, in the school, there's probably a little bit more thorough contact tracing going on than in the community. But this element here, this contact tracing, is extremely important for school districts if they're going to develop trust, if they're going to have a culture of safety, if they're going to have a culture of trust, which is what we're going to need to drive to if we're going to succeed in the pandemic long term. Contact tracing is extraordinarily important. And the fidelity of it, the transparency of it, the quality of it is incredibly important for a culture of safety and trust as it relates to the adults who are working in the schools, because if we're able to protect the highest risk population in the schools, which are the adults, we will naturally protect the children and the high-risk children who are in the schools. Now, second limitation is testing is incomplete. Not all families, not all staff were going out to get testing once they went through contact tracing. That is certainly true in schools, and that is most definitely true in the community. This only reflects data from 11 school districts, and the data are applicable to essentially reduced population density, termed the hybrid model in North Carolina schools. And so one of the if I had to wave a magic wand around some of improvements, perhaps it, in looking at these data, would really relate to fidelity of contact tracing and consistency of testing. Go ahead, next slide, please.
Let me ask a clarifying question. When you say hybrid model, Dr. Benjamin, are most of these districts, if not all, using the AABB model or two-cohort model, or are they also using a three-cohort?
Most of them are using a two-cohort model. Most of them have moved in early October to Plan A, especially for their elementary schools. For their elementary schools, sorry. I'm just starting to get data from those that are in Plan A, but I'm not prepared to speak about it publicly, primarily because those data thus far don't have any surprises for me.
Okay, thank you. But the hybrid is a two or three cohort model. Thank you.
That's correct. Yeah. And I've been hesitant to talk about any of the Plan A data because it's just a little too early. But there's nothing surprising yet in the Plan A data that I've received. Let's see. So what happens in the event of a school cluster? Well, like we did over the last 9 weeks with the schools that were in the ABCs, district leadership essentially should be getting a situational understanding. For example, I did not give you all the details around the clusters that I presented. That's to preserve some child, adult, district, and school confidentiality. But the superintendents involved know all of the details around masking, distancing, hand hygiene available, key circumstantial details. Were they having lunch? Were they in a particular classroom? Was it an extracurricular activity, et cetera? Then we had the district leadership engaging in a lessons learned with us, with the local health department, with other key stakeholders, including the staff involved at the school, the families, et cetera. And then review relevant policies. So, again, as evidenced by, turns out you do need to mask pre-K children. It turns out you really should be limiting your time that you're spending at lunch, and while you're at lunch, you need to be distanced, et cetera, as has been presented to you. Go ahead, next slide, please. So now this page here is very early draft. So we have just started to discuss this with stakeholders. The data, as I've mentioned to you, are under peer review. I would view especially the numbers in this page here to be a starting point. I don't see us finalizing any kind of, in any way finalizing this document until the manuscript that we've submitted has completed the peer review process. But these are the sorts of things that would initiate a conversation around, okay, what's happening in our school or in our school district, because you can have a cluster or clusters in a school, or you could have it at multiple schools within a district, and the same thing's true with secondary transmission. So as a reminder, a cluster is 5 or more cases with an epidemiological link, so they're linked to each other. So if you have multiple clusters within a school in a short period of time, you really are gonna want to take a very close look at what's happening within that school. Again, if you've got a mid-sized school district and you're getting multiple, again, this seems like a very small district to folks in Wake, but in the state of North Carolina, this would be a mid-sized school district. You really should be talking about what's happening within that school district. Clearly, these numbers would be a little bit higher at the district level for Wake County. The school-specific numbers are applicable. If you have substantial secondary transmission, remember, not all secondary transmission is captured in clusters. You can have 2 or 3 secondary transmissions, but that not be classified as a structure. So if you have substantial secondary transmission in either a school or in a school district, that is a time to really take an extremely hard look about what's going on in the schools. Go ahead, next slide, please. So what is it that that these school districts were doing? Well, transparency around COVID-19 infections. That includes number of infections by school and by week. As I look at Wake County public school system, you all provide that. Make a roadmap for contact tracing and testing. So this is in collaboration with your local health department. Here, I think, Wake County Schools has made a start on this. I've talked with the folks in the district about how you all do your contact tracing, and I understand what it is that you all are doing, but it's not clear to me that that every employee or every family can easily click on a link and say, "Oh, that's what happens. I understand that now." That kind of transparency, although contact tracing is going on in Wake County, and you're to be commended for that. The kind of clarity around that is not quite there yet. And this is not a surprise, as this was modified in October from make sure you conduct contact tracing to make sure all the staff and families really have the opportunity to understand contact tracing. That's been a fairly recent change for us, and it relates to moving toward a culture of both safety and trust. Both of those are really going to be worthwhile to move toward, because you guys are going to be in this together for the long haul, as hopeful as vaccines might be, and I can get into that later if you all want. Developing a dashboard, Wake is ahead of most school districts on that. The ABCs are working with school districts on on options for that. I think Wake is headed in the right direction there, and is consistent with peers, and one of the districts that's doing this reasonably well. Implement lessons learned. That's certainly happening. I'm on the phone fairly regularly with Wake County public school systems staff. So work with a third trusted party. So that's such as the ABC Science Collaborative. You're doing that, of course. Wake was an early adopter. Leverage the school-based metrics. So I presented that to you tonight. The details of how you leverage them. You may want to make tweaks to those metrics. You may like 90% of the document, not like 10% else. Whatever you do, leveraging school-based metrics is really key, because that's what you can modify. That's what you can work toward as a community, is your school-based metrics. Fighting pandemic fatigue. So this is early yet for Wake County public schools, because you've all only been open a couple of weeks. But I see some good things here. You've got, an anonymous line that folks, I think you've got a line that folks can call in to express anonymous concerns. You've got a survey that my understanding is that staff can fill out. I might seek to just have that to be easy use for the staff to check out. Some of your peer districts are validating mask adherence with film. I think that's it's got some pluses and minuses in the public school environment where we don't have a firm recommendation on that. The walkthroughs I know that you all are doing, there's maybe one or two detailed tweaks I might make to that. I can touch on that if you all like. I understand that you have a detailed schedule. It seems like at least your early data is very reassuring. It's early, but it seems like you're getting the job done there. The sports programs, you have plans for that. The arts programs, I reviewed that, and that's exemplary. So we're going to use that as long as the school board doesn't mind. We're going to use that. The plan that you have is this is a really good example of what to do, the kind of detail that you want. Considerable effort has been put forth for the special needs community. That really is the high-risk community in the school system. You have a communication plan, it's solid, and then you have started in hybrid, you're progressing, and thus far your secondary transmission is low. Go ahead, next slide. Again, thank you. There's 50 some odd North Carolina school districts, and then we are also now moving toward Georgia, Alaska, California, Missouri, Kansas, Michigan, and Ohio. And thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Benjamin. Questions from board members? Dr. Martin.
Thank you, Dr. Benjamin. I have a couple questions, particularly related to the data. I agree that the evidence seems to that we have suggests that secondary infections are low. My question is, are we getting data to be able to make that conclusion? Just this week, we were finally given information as to the staff versus student versus athletes infection. And as of last night, the data that we had received, that had that indication, there were 43 staff, 29 students, and 1 athlete reported. When I look at those numbers, it raises question to me whether we're getting enough data to know whether there are secondary infections, because the reports I've seen, student transmission is not a whole lot different nationally than regular community transmission, but we have more than twice, probably close to 3 times the number of students as we do staff, and yet we have substantially more staff reports. So that suggests to me that staff are reporting, because we're still very dependent on self-report. It suggests to me that staff are reporting, but students aren't necessarily reporting, and that seems to corroborate at least one email that the board received this week from a family where they indicated that they were convinced their student contracted COVID from school because that was the only external interaction that the family had, but was not identified by the health department as a secondary infection. So I guess my question is, how should we understand that staff to student ratio that seems quite disproportionate based on the population in our schools? And what does that tell us about the reliability of drawing conclusions from it?
All right, so let's see, 2 different things. So what fraction, so children, let's see, when I last looked at the numbers, children were maybe 9%, 11%, depends on what state you use, whether you use national, what month you use, which data source you use. And they are, a substantially higher fraction of the population than 9%. So I'm not surprised that to see children be somewhat lower on a relative basis than the adults. The second reason, which I think, however, you allude to, is the following reality as it relates to pathophysiology.
Is what?
Children. I'm sorry for speaking, for both mumbling and speaking quickly and using jargon. So all at the same time, it's like triple pain. My apologies, Dr. Martin. So as it relates to the pathophysiology or our understanding of the infection, we know that young children are more likely, and I think you allude to this maybe in your question, more likely to be asymptomatic. Because children are more likely to be asymptomatic, is it not likely, is it not plausible that we are missing primary infections? And is that not evidenced by the fact that there are more infections in adults than children? Yes, we are. Just like we're missing infections in the community in children, we are also missing them in schools. And then from that, is it possible that we are missing secondary infections in school and because some of the children are then asymptomatic and develop secondary infection. Yes, that's entirely plausible. That's happening quite likely in schools, just as it's happening in the community. However, it's the difference between the schools, number one, the difference between how well things are being done in schools relative to the community that is really striking. And the even if we were off by a magnitude of tenfold, we'd still have lower than expected secondary transmission in school. So, and then finally, the amount of asymptomatic infections really tops out at about 40% with COVID-19. So even if we're missing all of the asymptomatic infections, which I think is unlikely, but even if we are, we're still, the schools, certainly these 11 schools have done an outstanding job with respect to interrupting secondary transmission.
Would the collaborative be at all in favor of trying to work toward possibly developing a testing protocol like I think some of the most successful colleges and universities have done, that have a random testing structure for a population? It strikes me we could pick a couple schools and I mean, this is a problem that our testing protocol nationally is problematic, but if we really want to know this information, shouldn't we develop a testing protocol where we actually get comprehensive information as opposed to just relying on self-reports as we currently do?
Well, Dr. Martin, thank you for that question. That's an outstanding question. I think you and I, I'll give you some props here. I think you and I have touched on this before, and we actually we've taken that up within the collaborative. We have an application that's going into the CDC in about 2 weeks for their consideration, and we would love to work with Wake County on that. I had not planned on bringing that up today. We were hopeful to address that with you later this month. But since you brought it up, we would, or since you brought up that possibility, we would very much love to work with you all on that. There's a couple of different strategies that we've asked the CDC to consider. One of them is as you've outlined, and there's one or two others. So we would be pleased to work with Wake County on that. Now, just for families that are listening to this, before anyone would be approached by that, they would have to provide consent. Then we would approach them with the idea. Then they would have to have consent around that. So families would have the option of saying, and there's no need to email the board to tell them that you're totally uninterested in research. It's our responsibility to approach families first, see if we can approach them about research. We would have to get permission from the board to even do that. We're not talking about running out and testing a bunch of people here in December. We're talking about the concept. We'd be very open to working with you guys on that, Dr. Martin.
Thank you. I, for one, would be very supportive of that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Other questions from board members? Mrs. Cash.
I just want to reinforce one thing. Dr. Benjamin's been good to talk to me at old dark 30 in the morning, but in a good way. I mean, the barriers that we have in the community to identify secondary infections is exactly like the barriers we're having in our school. So the fact that on slide 13, where 775 primary infections, we observed only 32 of those in 930 expected. That is a big deal in Wake County and our public schools to see that we observed only 32 secondary infections. And so I think we need to pay attention to that, because after 9 weeks of study, that's a great number for us to say that our kids and our staff are probably very safe in our schools.
Just one point of clarification, Ms. Cash. That data reflects the 11 districts that are
right.
part of, not Wake County necessarily.
Yeah, right.
But the
I'm
11
sorry.
districts that have been in since August.
I'm sorry. I did know that actually, because he told me about that. But yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. Yes, the primary infections in the 11 districts that reported after 9 weeks in school. That's a big change for being in school versus being in the community. So I think that's a great outcome for us.
Thanks. I think the school districts that provided these data were largely what I would want to emphasize this. These were districts that I would classify as kind of all in. They definitely wanted to adopt as many of the principles as they could. Wake County is a district like this. Chatham County, Orange County are districts like this. And obviously the districts like Alexander and Ash, et cetera, that were a part of submitting the data are really to be commended. And I think that, Wake itself, you're starting to get the data that you're really, as a board, I think, would want to see, as far as, yes, there are primary infections coming into the Wake County School District, but you've got some very encouraging preliminary results in Wake County thus far.
Mr. Hagerty.
Thank you. And again, thank you, Dr. Benjamin, for the analysis and the presentation. A lot of good information here. Could you tell me a little bit about the timeline that you have for, and what I mean by this is, just for setting our expectations, how long does it take from, like the reporting of the data for you to conduct your analysis and then come back with, reasonable, results or analysis that you have confidence in? And what I mean is, like, so for example, if we come back in early January, will that have been enough time that you could have looked at numbers from our phased-in reopening that's taken place the last few months, or would you have enough numbers from the other ABC schools to look at some of these other questions we've had about, are there differences in results by grade level? Or to Ms. Kushner's point, we're reopening our elementary schools, K through 3, pre-K through 3, in a Plan A environment, which is very different than the rotations that a lot of these schools have been using. By January, is that enough time that you will have data for us about how those reopenings under like a Plan A model for elementary schools have gone compared to schools that have operated in rotations?
For Wake County specifically, I would have a general idea of how you are doing in establishing your culture of safety and how you are progressing in your relationships with your community, building, headed in the right direction. I would have that a global sense of that, but I would not have confidence within Wake County to address for example, Plan A. My understanding is like your first days of Plan A are happening like now. Is that, is my memory on that correct? Maybe you had the week before Thanksgiving?
Correct. It was the week before Thanksgiving, November 16th.
Okay, so-
1 week. This is
Right.
technically our
Well-
second week.
Right, so you had a week, and then you had a week off, and now you've got a week, and then you're going to have another week. It usually takes you can kind of see if things are going horribly awry, and I would get those data in, like the week before everybody goes off to Christmas break. But that's about all I could say specifically about Plan A. And the reason for that is the children who are in Plan A, let's say this week, they're not going to infect anybody until late this week. Then those children that they infect, they inoculate. It takes them a couple of days for infection to set in. Then it takes a couple of days for symptoms, and then the contact tracing starts to happen, and they're then positive, and then they infect other children. So we don't start to see a buildup of secondary cases until you've been in school for a couple of weeks. That's why when back in the summer, when the state of Georgia, when a bunch of their schools opened up, and it was like, I'm dating myself here, but I was going to say it was like Woodstock. I didn't go to Woodstock. I wasn't there, but I read about it in a book. It was a party down there with mask free, right? And it all seemed fine for a week or two, and then it blew up on them. So you're not going to really know about any intervention that you do. It's going to take you a couple of weeks to figure that out. So I would say I wouldn't have a lot of confidence in early January yet about Plan A. I would just have, I have a sense that things are headed in the right direction because of the cycle time of the virus and one child infecting the next. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. That again, and what I'm looking for is just, reasonable expectations on when we could know what. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
And by early January, I would have, if you'll remember that I presented some things to y'all in October where I said, I'm not sure of this yet, but it kind of looks good maybe from these districts that have been open. And we had the first hint of preliminary data, back in October. I would have the first hint of preliminary data that I would feel comfortable speaking about from these other districts at that time.
Thank you.
About Plan A.
Mrs. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. And then actually to continue Mr. Hegarty's point, and also to highlight, I appreciated the kudos you were giving Wake County, but you did highlight concern about, and I've heard concern about the consistency of our compliance monitoring and having a roadmap for contact tracing. Glad to hear that the testing is something that we're considering. But I would like to have Superintendent Moore and perhaps Dr. Benjamin talk about how can we build that confidence and how can we make sure that our principals and staff have that culture of compliance with the expectations we have for monitoring and reporting cases, whether it's from students or staff.
I'll start a little bit, Dr. Benjamin, because we've had some discussions amongst staff as well as with Dr. Benjamin about some options and some places. So let me start with just reporting in general and building that culture of confidence. So one of the things that I have discussed with Dr. Benjamin is the possibility of tweaking our daily teacher survey a little bit to provide a better opportunity to get feedback more consistently than what we're currently getting, because it's hit or miss across schools in terms of how many teachers are filling it out on a daily basis. And there's some tweaks that we can maybe make to that process to make it a little bit easier and more useful. So we'll have those conversations with some teachers as well in order to make sure that they're a part of helping us make those tweaks, whatever they may be. The second piece really has to do with what he mentioned about contact tracing. So there's not a superintendent that I've spoken with that doesn't have questions, thoughts, aspirations about how to improve contact tracing in that process. So two things, the roadmap, sort of visual step-by-step type guidance so that everybody understands it in our community is something that we are doing and going to work on to have available as part of our presence on our website. And that's about communication. That piece is about communication. But the piece around implementation and what it looks like. So I've had several calls with staff from the county, including the county manager and our own director of health services, Tim Simmons, to sort of talk through what some of the conundrums and barriers are that we're facing in schools with regards to the time between when we know there is a positive case and we do the initial tracing, determine where there might be exposures, and then send that information to the county for the county to do the follow-up. And these are the kinds of things that are taking time. Not all tests are valid tests. And when the county has to chase down where the test occurred and who it's from, sometimes that takes time. So one of the things we can do on our end, because they can't start the contact tracing until they verify the test, the positive test. And so that starts backing it up right immediately. So one of the things that we can do on our end, and we discussed this with our county health officials, is how we provide some support or guidance to staff members about what to ask for or what to get when they get a positive test result. Like if it's over the phone and it's verbal, they need something in writing or an email or something from the place that provides a head start for verifying that it is a valid test. So that's something we can communicate on our end in terms of best practices to folks. And then from the county, and the county does have a small group that is dedicated to doing that work for our district now. We were able to affect that change, and they actually do the contact tracing fairly quickly once they get the test verified. It's the verification of the test that sometimes is taking a while before they can do the contact tracing. Another strategy that we have thought about is bringing the whole operation in-house, quite frankly. And we would need additional personnel to do it. We cannot do it with existing personnel. We would need to hire folks specifically and train them to do contact tracing, and then use our own, most of the nurses that we have in schools are funded by the county and managed by the county. But there is a small number of them that we hire, we pay for, that are managed by us. And so we could use that small staff of nurses that we have and contact tracers that we might hire to try to put our arms around this process and make it flow a little bit more quickly. And so we're talking with the county about, can we do what you do, right? So that we can, just have it done more quickly and more in a manner that helps build that confidence, so that folks aren't sitting around after they know that there's been a positive case in their building and they're waiting to see whether or not they're going to be contact traced, or they know they should be because they know who the person is that has got virus because that person told them, and they're expecting a call and they haven't gotten it yet, that sort of thing. So those are the things that we know are putting folks in uncomfortable positions, principals in incredibly uncomfortable positions in schools, that we need to figure out how to address from our end. What can we do? And that's what's led to this potential proposal that will be coming forward likely with the county for us to bring that more in-house so that we can manage it. Because they've got a lot on their plate also at the county level, because they're dealing with the entire county. They're getting ready to have to deal with potential of a vaccine coming forward and how they're going to manage that in the community. So I think lots of people have a lot to do, and but we know that it's important to our community that if our schools are going to be open, that they be safe, and that we can build that sense of confidence, and we can show evidence that they are. So, and I think how we might improve our contact tracing in terms of a process ourselves, and then how we communicate what that process is to our stakeholder groups, including our teachers and families, is going to be really important. And those are areas that we are talking about now.
And it is underscored in Dr. Benjamin's presentation that schools are lower risk places, but we also have to make sure that the adults in our buildings feel that way for them as well. If we're going to protect children, I like when he said, if we protect the adults, that's how we're protecting our children. So we have to make sure that that we're building that confidence in our staff that the protocols we have in place are being followed and are keeping everyone healthy and safe, because these are public health decisions that are impacting our whole community. Thank you.
Mrs. Cash.
Where are people going that they can't get an email verification of a positive or negative that can be sent to the health department? I haven't heard of this yet.
This is feedback that we got at the county level when they begin their contact tracing about what the folks don't have handy to demonstrate, verify the test, other than just contacting the facility where they got it. So I can't provide you any details on that. We just agreed that on our end, we would work with them on some language that we could provide to our staff so that they would know what to ask their physicians or urgent cares or whatever for to make that process easier at the county level.
I just was under understanding that there was quite a good network of connectivity between all the areas that we're testing to talk to each other. So I'm just trying to figure out where they're going that's not connected.
Yeah.
I can tell you the health department doesn't send it to you. They send you straight to LabCorp. They do not contact you at all. They only call you if it's positive. If it's not, you have to call LabCorp.
Well, no, but if it's a positive, they contact you.
Yes, but it's not an email. It's a phone call.
Do you have another question? All right, we'll take one more question, and then you said a few more slides? Yeah. Okay. Mrs. Scott.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that question, I think some of the confusion with our employees and community members has been, how does that happen? If somebody, what is somebody saying to where you get an email from the school that said there have been, there's a positive COVID at your school, but then that isn't part of what is in the report the following week. I mean, I understand that means it hasn't been confirmed with the health department, but is that just, where is that coming from? What's an example of that?
When an individual reports through the screening process at the school to the administration when they're coming in, could be through the screening process, could be through a phone call, that they let the school know that they have been exposed, have a symptom, or they've got a positive test, then we funnel that information from the principal directly to a specific email box that goes to health services for Wake County Schools, so that health services can contact the teacher to ask them some preliminary questions about, when were you tested, what was the test, where did you go, whatever information we can get from them. Talk to them about potential exposures. Were you closer than 6 feet to anybody for more than 15 minutes aggregate? Were you ever unmasked around folks in less than 6 feet away? Those questions to develop a potential list of exposures. And then we funnel all of that information to the county. And then the county takes over from there, verifying the test result. And once that test result is verified, they then follow up with all of the potential exposures to sort of close that loop. So we send the letter home, the email, the notification, as soon as an employee tells us, and I think the letter says that the individual has reported that they have tested positive, because the actual official result has to come and be verified by the health department.
So this is a regular occurrence. Somebody else would have to fill me in on this, where someone tests positive from a private provider or something, and then the health department looks into it and they double check it and they say, no, that's not really positive. I'm just curious how that discrepancy even starts.
Yeah, I don't have details on their process in terms of when a case, like if a case is reported to us but then not verified by them. I don't have any details on that.
So they are just, if somebody says I test, they just call up their school to the data manager, whoever they're calling into that day, and say, my child's not coming to school, they tested positive. That goes through the process you described, but they might not have necessarily had a test. I'm just trying to sort of reconcile, because there have been not substantial numbers, but concerning numbers to the people who employed at those schools. Why did we get those letters? Why did we hear that somebody was positive and then that never follows through?
I think that I think it's the definition of exposure. I mean, that's what the county is, we'll do the preliminary work on it and send the information on, but the county does that follow-up. And I think it takes time, and if you're not contacted, it's because somehow, I'm guessing through the exploration at the county level and their contact tracing, it's not deemed an exposure. If it is deemed an exposure, you're contacted.
But I'm talking about just the positive cases where if you get the email from your child's school that someone was positive, but then that never does show up on the metrics on the website. That's different from exposure in a positive
right.
test.
If it doesn't ever translate onto the website, it's because it hasn't been confirmed at whatever point that website is updated from the county.
I guess
I share that concern. I've talked to Tim about it several times. I would like us to look into that because we're approaching on the order of 10% that aren't getting confirmed. Somewhere between 5 and 10% are not getting confirmed, and that's a pretty big number. Because I don't think people are going to just say, hey, I got a positive test, report it to my school, letter's going to go home, and somehow that mythically disappears. So I would like to formally request that we look into that so we understand why we're getting notified and families are getting notified of cases that don't show up with the health department. I mean, it may be that they just haven't been able to notify, but at a minimum, or verify, but at a minimum, I think we should have it on our website, and even with an asterisk that says this was reported but not verified by the health department. I would feel better about that than having it not appear at all.
And that's, yes.
Yeah, and we're sort of bleeding into the next part of our presentation where Tim is going to do some updates on that dashboard and the metrics and what's in there. And I think we've got Kelly Creech also on standby who can provide additional information as well. So if you'll hold on to that for just a minute, we're going to get to it in just a second.
Okay, and I appreciate that because it is, and that is part of providing that transparency. I mean, it's the first principle mentioned, be transparent, and I think that is the transparency that we need, and just an explanation to build that trust in their community. And the other question I have was really quick, which I feel is much lighter than that first one. But Dr. Benjamin, if you're still on, you had mentioned that the plans that we had for our extracurriculars were exemplary, and I was wondering if you could just expand on that a little bit about what it is in our plans that you're seeing that you are happy to read about.
So when I opened up like the plan for the arts, as a physician, I could look at that plan and go, I can form a picture in my head about how the children are going to sing in chorus, who's going to be doing what they're going to be wearing, that is a mask, how far they're going to be away from each other, how we're going to have people inside versus outside, how we make that decision, what are we going to do with these wind instruments. It's just very, there's attention to detail, there's an understanding of the risk factors for transmission, there's an overarching dedication to prevention and safety. And it's just, those documents are on point.
And I was just curious if someone knows, if someone could let me know, is that the part where none of the people were singing or playing, or is there a different plan in place for when the instrument PPE had been received?
Scott, I think I can speak to part of that. So the plan that Dr. Benjamin is referring to does speak to masking inside the classroom with singing, masking outside and the distance, the amount of time that is appropriate for singing, the amount of time that they need to wait from when they do engage in singing to allow the air to circulate and potentially clear aerosol. The same for band wearing the mask and then the instrument cover. We did take a measured approach in our collaboration with ABC in that although there were some districts and some schools that were not inside our district, but that were allowing singing and playing before we did, we wanted to learn from other districts, and we wanted to make sure that we had all of the personal protective equipment in the district, and that we were able to make sure that was distributed, and that we could be consistent with regard to our expectations, with regard to our guidelines, processes, and procedures, training all of the music educators on the guidelines, and making sure that as much as possible we could have that culture of consistency and safety that you spoke about. I'll also say with the academics, we took sort of that, or with the athletics, we took sort of that same approach. When we could have started athletics, we waited several months before we began, because we wanted to learn. We wanted to make sure that we had the right practices and protocols in place, and that we could essentially make sure our personnel was properly trained.
Thank you for that, Dr. McFarland, and thank you, Dr. Benjamin, as well. I think that is fantastic to hear. And with athletics, we also had the guidance of the NCHSAA to follow. And I think if we have we haven't seen them yet for our fine arts, but I want to applaud you on that. That's fantastic, in a way that Wake County is leading, because there has not been consistent guidance. The Bandmasters Association, absolutely, and NCMEA. I mean, there've been a lot of proposals, but that's fantastic to hear. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
And if I could just take the opportunity to do a quick shout out to Freddie Lee Heath, and also the band directors and the choral directors who we met with several times, and also were really strategic in their work in helping to support and go through the document with a fine-tooth comb and give us the perspective of this might be missing, or in a real classroom from the teacher perspective, this is a question that still has to be answered, so that we could really make the documents as useful as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you. We have some amazing educators in Wake County. Thank you so much.
Go ahead.
So, Dr. Benjamin, I just want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. You're welcome to stay on as we move into a conversation about our metrics dashboard that Tim Simmons will start shortly, and we'll talk soon.
Great. Thank you all for having me, and I'm glad that you all are off to a very, very good start. And the leadership clearly has put together really a strong platform for you guys to succeed. The superintendent and that office has done really well. The staff at the staff in the schools are clearly stepping up and doing a really good job across the board. The teachers, the bus drivers, the cafeteria workers. We know that they've gotten off to a good start, because if they hadn't, we'd be seeing it in the data. So really, tip of the hat to all of the staff that you have, and to the families who are buying into what you all have put together. So thanks for having me, and thanks for getting off to a strong start. And we'll see you later this school year.
Thank you, Dr. Benjamin. Much appreciated. All right, then we've got a few more slides to get through in the presentation.
Yeah, and with that, Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and board members, I'll follow some of those comments, and we wanted to take a few minutes to highlight what we've learned from the earliest days of reporting, as shown on the district's COVID metrics page, and point out some of the changes that we've made to the page itself. What you're looking at here is a placeholder photo. I would strongly encourage you, if you've got a device in front of you, or if you're following along online, to go to the live page. You would go to wcpss.net. You would go to the district's homepage, and then if you click on the alert bar at the top that says "Read the COVID-19 updates," it will take you to a page that has in the second column an item called Check Our COVID Metrics. you will see an updated version of this page because there are some changes that we'd like to bring your attention to. Also, it's got the most recent data. While you're doing that, first a little bit of context. One of the bigger benefits of this page is to eventually provide a way for families and staff in the community to gauge secondary transmissions on campus. As Dr. Benjamin talked about, this would be one member of the school community transmitting or infecting another on the community. There are other areas it does not address, so we just discussed some of that regarding contact tracing and the challenges in this area. This is really this is a counter. This counts cases and gives us some sense over time. As the conversation between Dr. Benjamin and Dr. Martin illustrates, it's important to understand that these numbers are not going to be perfect. Cases at every level, meaning school districts, counties, states, they're going to be missed. But we're doing our best to collect the information, and I'll get a little bit to that process, as well as the question that came up here about how does a case end up not being confirmed. But in the big sense, this page gives us some sense of where we're at as a school system. Because as we discussed the last time the board met, we can't stop the virus, but we can stop the spread, and you should be able to see that. By that, I mean you should be able to see our success or the degree of our success within this metrics page. So just a little bit of orientation for how the numbers end up on this page, and this is as much for members of the public as it is for board members, because I know we've discussed this briefly. The process begins with a phone call or an email to WCPSS Health Services, usually an email. The vast majority of the calls and emails are sent by the school principal, because the vast majority of calls come from employees and families who see the school principal as their first contact when they're sick. When a case is reported to WCPSS Health Services, they conduct the initial interview basically to determine if the claim is legitimate. It's a very low bar to clear. I'm having symptoms. I went to my doctor. He did a PCR test, and it came back positive. That's all it takes. Sometimes all they need to do is tell us the circumstances, and it's clearly that it's a legitimate case. The cases that are reported to the county, which then gives us the confirmation list a week later, and I'll get into the detail on that in a moment. I want to make clear that call is all it takes to trigger a letter to the school community, because we want to be quick in letting them know in that area of transparency. We don't want to sit on information for 2, 3 days, 4 days before we tell them that there's been a case that's been reported. To date, we have not had a confirmed case of secondary transmission. We've had 2 cases that were suspected but never confirmed. So at worst, that means that staff and students stopped the spread in those 2 cases, which is precisely the goal, and that's good. And then I'm going to echo Dr. Benjamin and say thus far, because we're really early in the process. I think total you'll see about 150 cases. The end of this week will be 200, maybe 200 plus. There are still cases that are working their way through the system, because while we report weekly, it can take a couple of weeks before a case is fully confirmed and recorded from the county back to us. And so at that point, we need to understand that there's going to be some lag time built into this. If you go to the page itself, you'll see that one of the things we've done is differentiated staff or students, whether it's a staff or student involved in any given case. This was initially something we did not do because the initial legal advice was to be very, very careful about possibly identifying an individual in any way. After we got a couple of weeks under our belt, Jonathan Blumberg and some of his associates at Barrington Smith were able to apply what we were doing more directly to the communicable diseases law, I should say, and came back and said, yes, at the level at which you're doing it, meaning school level or district level, we can indeed go ahead and begin to differentiate by staff and students. So you'll see there that has been done both for the school level for any individual case that's reported, as well as total cases for the week. One can add these up in 2-week cycles or 3-week cycles as you wish. Once a case gets to be more than a few weeks old, the likelihood that it's involved in secondary transmission diminishes. But as Dr. Benjamin just pointed out, you need at least several weeks in order to be able to get a better handle on secondary transmission you might be looking at. As you look at that metrics page, you can see it's fairly obvious that they've been going up each week. That's somewhat to be expected. We've had an increasing number of students coming in each week, as well as just an increasing number of contacts between people. So you don't want to see increasing cases, but increasing cases, but it's to be expected. And again, you would see little to no secondary transmission, which is decidedly good news thus far. I feel like I should knock on wood whenever I say that. But for the reasons that I'm talking about here, we've stuck pretty tightly to the routine of quick notifications for all the families when there's a reported case, and then weekly cases when they're confirmed. I may need to defer to Kelly Creech if I get myself over the line on this, but I have seen, as we put these numbers together, a couple of ways in which a case can be reported to the school and then not come back confirmed. One of the easiest ones to define is there just was no result. So the employee told us that they're pretty sure that they are sick, they have symptoms. What they've told us certainly seems as though it should be presumed positive and that we should tell the community, but when the county checks, they can't find a test. This does not happen very often. It has literally only happened a few times that I can think of. Another is it takes the county longer to confirm than we would have expected. My understanding is there are certain types of tests that are faster to confirm than others. If an employee can tell us the date and the location at which they had the test and the type of test, the county can usually confirm that very quickly. If it's an antigen test, my understanding is it can take upwards of 5 days. If it's going to take that long for a confirmed positive to come back, there is likely going to be an overlap, or a lag time, I should say, between when the case is first reported to the school system and when the case is confirmed by the county. To say that lag time is a little bit frustrating is a big understatement, because we're all sitting there, wait from the school to the district, including board members, wondering what happened. And as we discussed, or as you discussed previously in your conversations here, being able to speed up that process would be greatly helpful. But the bulk of this, I think, Mr. Haggerty, you asked about January. You can think this through now that I'm explaining it. We'll have another 2 full weeks, 3 full weeks. Then we'll get a break, two weeks of break. Then we'll come back. Then it doesn't exactly start over again in January, but your link between your December cases and your January cases will be broken because schools will be closed. So the other thing I want to leave you with is that it's the accumulation of data over time. I do suspect, Dr. Martin, to your comment, I will be surprised if 5 to 10% ends up being the unconfirmed amount. I think that that's probably an outlier from that particular set of results from that week. I think once we get the lag times overlapping, we'll have a much better understanding of both the unconfirmed portion as well as other portions of answers to questions that have been posed here. So that's what we're looking at with the metrics page. If we have any questions, I'd be happy to answer it. If not, I would turn it back to Superintendent Moore, who I think there's one wrap-up slide on meal distributions.
Mr. Hagan.
Thank you. And just very quickly, when I go to the site and I look at it, I see a number of cases that are broken down where it'll tell you like one student, Panther Creek High School, one student, Sanderson High School. And seeing that our high school's students are all in remote, I'm just curious where these cases are coming from. Are these regional program students? Are these extracurricular cases? Are these off-campus students?
It is more than likely either regional program students or extracurricular, because as you recall, a number of our sports teams are in fact engaged in off-season workouts at this point.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Mrs. Scott, did you have a question?
I did. I just had a quick question. Are we reporting like central office and Rock Quarry Road? Is there testing or reporting going on for those employees?
There is. That call generally, instead of coming to the principal, it generally ends up with the supervisor, and then the supervisor contacts WCPSS Health Services, and the rest of the process remains the same after that.
Is that reported on the web page?
On the metrics page? Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a few cases in there that you'll see them designated as central services, or you'll see them, there's one or two for Rock Quarry.
Okay, got it.
They're not, they're going to be dwarfed by the school cases, of course.
Sure.
There's just so many more schools.
Right, but just certainly for consideration when/if we do our all of this testing and monitoring in-house. Thank you.
Okay. Superintendent Moore, there was one other slide there.
So the last slide is just about helping our community understand what we're doing with winter break and meals. So we have put together an opportunity for families to receive a meal bundle for a week for winter break. And we're asking folks to put orders in online, and as folks are picking up at schools their meals now, we're telling them about this opportunity so that they can go ahead and make a reservation so that we can prepare a bulk meal. And we will be delivering to a number of different sites, school sites as we do normally, hotels, some of the places where our McKinney-Vento students who are experiencing homelessness are located. So you'll see there the time period in terms of preparing bundles and the distribution of meals. We're not really, let me turn it over to Paula DeLuca to provide the details, just to make sure that she can tell you exactly what's happening on which dates. So Paula, are you there?
Sure.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody. First, Child Nutrition is just so grateful to be able to provide this service to all of our students during the long winter break. In order for us to get ready for that, we have to do a lot of prep and staging, and so we have found a certain number of schools that we will be designating as locations for the meal bundles to be picked up at. We are going to include 8 lunches and 8 breakfasts in every meal bundle, and the bundles are available to all children age 18 and under, and they do not have to be Wake County Public School System students. They can be siblings or other children in the community. In addition to making them available at certain school locations, we'll also be making them available at our Big Bus food truck stops, as well as the hotels where we have some community members residing. And a form has been prepared and is available online on our food distribution website. And that's the site that lists all of the locations where we currently provide services. It's also available on the Wake County Public School System Child Nutrition website on the menu page. And the form needs to be submitted by this Friday. It's December 4th. And on the form and completing it, we're asking families to designate the location that they'll be picking up the meals. We will be distributing them on December 21st, but in order to get prepared for that, we have a couple of changes to our scheduling for our food distribution. So on the 15th of December, we'll distribute 2 lunches and 2 breakfasts that will cover that day and the next day. And that allows our staff to actually dedicate their time to food prep for this bundle prep. And then finally, on December 18th, we'll be doing the same by issuing 2 meals for that Friday and the Monday. And that following Monday, the December 21st, is when we'll actually be making the distribution of all of the meal bundles. So what we ask is, for those that are interested, to just please go online, download the order form, or fill it out online if you'd like. But if you'd like to submit a paper copy, you can do that. And we also have paper copies available at all of our current food distribution and Big Bus food truck locations for those families that may not have internet capability. Distribution will occur again on the 21st between 10:45 and 12:45 at the school locations, and then we will actually be distributing at the food truck locations at the normal service times. If you have any questions, just reach out to your local child nutrition service staff members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Luca, for that update. Ms. Scott.
Thank you, and thank you so much to our child nutrition services for everything you did to provide meals over the Thanksgiving holiday. Bringing meals to these families and just providing them with the support they need, with dignity, and the care and consideration that all of our employees bring is appreciated so much. Mr. Luque actually answered my question. You said that the paper copies would be available at school sites now. So that was really my biggest concern, is many of these families may not know, and plus the deadline is, that's fast, this Friday, for the meal bundles for the winter break. So I'm glad to know that there are paper copies available. And I was just curious if some of our community partners who sometimes come into our schools during non-COVID times, and those who help provide meals, we have them throughout Wake County, if they are aware of this, if they're also sort of letting families know, if they're able to help them submit the forms online, or just have additional paper copies in other areas, like maybe where people might be picking up backpack, buddy, or just other meal supplements, if we could have extra paper copies at some different areas.
Yes, the food security work group has gathered together through this pandemic, is fully aware. All of the partners that are involved were provided with a form. They are making those forms available to the various food hubs that exist throughout the county, as well as through some of their community organizations. So we're hopeful that the word has reached those that need it. And certainly we're very happy to have anybody else reach out to us that would be interested in receiving any of the information that we can help, further distribute.
Thank you so much, Paula. I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you, Mr. Luca, and I certainly echo all of the sentiments of gratitude for the work that you and your team have done. Absolutely, since March. It goes without saying, this has been the yeoman's work, and you all have shepherded well with partners and with our staff. One addition to Mrs. Scott's point was, can we also, and this is not for Mr. Luca, but more for our staff, can we make sure our teachers also know? It'd be great if they can drop it in the chat boxes during their classes, so that students are also seeing the form just as routine, or on asynchronous day, if they can add it to their sign-in, because all of them have to sign in. So I think it just would be helpful if there were multiple ways, because December 4th feels like tomorrow, because Friday is not that far away. And I certainly understand the lead time, but I also think the more ways that we can make sure students and families have the information, the better. And I'll certainly share it with a lot of the community partners, as most of our board will work with our students. But that would be great if our student support services and or teachers both can contribute to making sure students are aware.
Okay, we'll get something out tomorrow to different groups.
Okay, thank you. Does that conclude the update for today?
That
All
concludes
right.
our update today.
Okay.
And if I can make
sorry.
one, and to echo the applause to our child nutrition service workers. They have just, as Ms. Johnson-Hostler said, since March, been front and center for our students in our community, and I am glad they're going to be getting a well-deserved winter break. So that gratitude to them.
All right. Thank you for that. Well, with that will wrap up our work session. We will consider this work session adjourned so that we can transition very quickly to our public meeting and start of our swearing-in ceremony at 5:30. So with that, we stand adjourned for our work session. Thank you very much.